Right, so welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. Today will be a little bit different because we want all of your participation in a giant roundtable. So get your thinking hats ready. Johanna will be facilitating that in a minute. So just as an introduction then, my name is Liam Henderson, chair of the Rail Innovation Group, and I'm in London in the cloudy day. I'm going to go next to Johanna.
Hi, I'm Johanna. I'm part of the Rail Innovation Group with Liam as well, and I'm going to be facilitating today's event.
Deb.
Hi, I'm Deb Carson, and I'm also part of the Rail Innovation Group, and I am going to be, I think I'm going to be sort of setting the scene for the conversations. That's what Liam's asked me to say. So
Subject matter expert.
Yeah, yes, that's me. Yeah, that's me.
Peter.
Hi, Peter Hicks, director at Open Train Times, perpetually busy in North London and covered in cat hair at the moment.
And we have someone called Be Bright, Be Brief, Be Gone.
Oh.
I've tried to change it while we're on, but I can't wrap them out to do it. I can do it when we're not online, but it's a throwback from a quiz last Friday with my family, so apologies for that.
I think you should keep it.
I had a psychosomatic test done once, and that was how it's recommended people should interact with me.
Right.
Anyway, yeah, Ian Rush, Data and Process Advantage, Data Management Consultant.
Then we've got Joe.
Me, sorry, Joe Routledge from Lumo.tax. We specialise in supporting clients with their R&D tax credits, patent box, capital allowance savings, and the subject was, so I thought I'd jump on. Thank you.
Great. Ben?
Ben Valley, project engineering consultant for CPC Systems, currently working on Crossrail and all lines modernisations.
Wayne?
Sorry, I was muted. Didn't expect you to come to me that quick. I'm normally right at the end. Wayne Marks Butler, CCD Design and Ergonomics. We are a consultancy that looks at passenger experience, passenger behaviour, and how can we design better.
Eden?
Good afternoon, Hayden Sutherland. I'm the founder and chair of Open Transport Initiative, the open banking for transport and mobility standard.
Milda?
Hi, Milda. I am from Railway Industry Association. I used to be part of the very...
You still are.
Yeah.
You just don't love us as much as you used to.
Playing game. From afar.
Ray? Ray, you're on mute.
Ray, mate, you're muted.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ray Chapman. I run a consultancy focusing on infrastructure investment mainly at the moment. So I'm eagerly awaiting for Rishi's announcement at 1 p.m. today after this. So
I think you're going to be disappointed.
I hope not. Otherwise, our MPs are going to have a lot of work ahead of them.
Katie?
Hello, my name's Katie and I'm from a company called Afinsta. We're a software development company based in Birmingham. I'm sorry if you can hear my very whingy puppy. She's not happy because I'm not playing with her, so I'll have to keep muting myself.
No problem.
Thank you.
Then we've got Anna.
Hi, I'm Anna from Hitachi, Anna Woodard from Hitachi, Business Development Manager.
Chris Jones.
Everyone, I'm Chris. I work for the Department for Transport, leading on the Southern Access to Heathrow programme.
Emily.
Hi everyone, I'm Emily, co-founder of One Big Circle, based in Bristol, and we've created Ava, which is our video technology product, which is out and about on the rails at the moment, collecting video data and getting it to the people that need to see it whilst everyone's currently working at home.
Adam?
I'm Adam Sargent. I work for Network Rail as an IT graduate. Since the last Munch and Learn, I've actually changed jobs. I now work as a performance analyst alongside with East Midlands Railway.
Oh,
Ooh, exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Ashley?
Hey everyone, yeah, program manager over at Loughborough University of London.
We've got Nuno.
Nuno, yeah, hiya. Nuno Vesco from Phoenix Contact. We do electrical components basically for rolling stock and infrastructure.
That's
me.
Claire Bowen.
Sorry, everyone. Excuse me. I'm on mute and camera off because emails are coming in as we chat. But I'm from the Energy Innovation Centre, and we're working on a couple of projects with Network Rail, innovation projects on uninterrupted power systems, and potentially a new one upcoming starting in the next month or two that I won't say too much about at the moment. So we're just looking to learn as much as we can about innovation in the rail sector.
Great. And then we've got Jeff Hoyle.
Hey everyone, I'm Jeff Hoyle. I'm founder of Zest Consult. It's a new consultancy that started about a month and a half ago, looking at digital transformation and digital technology across transport sector. I was recently in Costain before that, so I'm quite familiar with rail, highways, and so on.
Great, thank you. And then I think is someone called G. Woolard. Introduce yourself.
Sorry, I was on mute. Big pardon. I'm George Willard. I look after the rail sector for Cubis Systems. Got a few products in for product acceptance at the moment as well, so always on the lookout for answers to innovation questions.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody. Hopefully now you will know each other. I will hand over to Johanna in a second, but I'm just wondering, from the people here, we've got 21 people here. Can I ask, can anyone put their hand up if they're not based in and around London? So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, 6. So 6 of the 20, which is timely considering our conversation today. So I'll hand over to Deb. I think you're going to set the scene for us, aren't you?
Yes, I was going to set the scene. Well, I think Johanna was going to ask me some questions, but she doesn't have to. I can set the scene.
I was going to ask you the questions and let you set the scene first. So the idea, what I thought we would do is I thought that you could talk about some of the things, some of the topics that we'd already talked about in terms of innovation, regional innovation, and what that means for investment in the regions. I thought we could explore that first. And then I've got some follow-up questions that might come out of your conversation or other things that I have prepared or bring people in with. That's what I thought we would do.
Yeah,
so that's okay. Sort of like
that's absolutely fine. That is absolutely fine. Yeah, no, I think, well, just, I mean, I suppose to take a big step back and set the scene, which is what I was thinking I would do, is just to sort of say that in, you know, it's obviously a very interesting time all round, I suppose, for where we are in terms of transport, but obviously not just transport, in terms of where we are as a country, with everything that's happening with lockdown and how that's impacting on the transport sector now and how it will affect things in the future. And obviously that's going to have a big impact on how we look at things like evaluating business cases and all that kind of thing, which you could say is very troubling, but actually it's also a massive opportunity, I think, to do things differently. So there's sort of two big policy, sort of government policy areas that I think this discussion sort of falls into, which is one, the government's strong appetite to sort of level up the UK economy, which is obviously what we're talking about now. We're talking about innovation in the regions, and you know, I'm sure the discussions around sort of devolution and all that sort of thing will come into that. So there's the kind of levelling up, you know, how do we get the investment out of being focused around London and all that sort of thing, and all the discussions around sort of, you know, left behind areas of the country and all that. And obviously that's something that a project like HS2 has been predicated on, this idea of shifting economic activity out of London and really supporting that not just the big cities, but the wider sort of regions around the big cities to become more economically productive, I guess. The other big policy area, as far as I see it, is that obviously this whole notion, not that I want to be too cynical, but this whole notion of us achieving net zero by 2050, which obviously the government has signed up to, has said that we'll achieve it. I mean, I've got to say, if I'm going to be honest, I haven't seen much policy behind it at the moment, actually, that's going to get us there. Talk is obviously cheap. As I said to somebody yesterday, I could announce that I was going to marry Johnny Depp, but would I actually get married to him? Probably not. So, you know, there's so much behind that, getting to net zero, and innovation, whether it's innovation of sort of thought or whether it's innovation of kind of activities, projects, you know, manufacturing, you name it, right across the sector. It's huge. It's huge. And again, it's a huge opportunity, I think, for things to be being done very differently. So if you sort of take that down to sort of transport, which is obviously the area that I work in, and the Rail Innovation Group is obviously sort of sits in that sort of space, then you know, you could be looking at things like creating user-friendly, you know, a nationwide public transport system, for example. You know, I mean, we could even, let's face it, throw caution to the wind and have a national transport plan. I mean, you know, could you even, is that innovation, or is that just something that perhaps we should have had some while ago? But obviously there's the opportunities to kind of think about that are now, aren't they? And I mean, if you're looking at sort of some of the work that's been done in Europe around, you know, setting up mobility hubs, so that you're not just getting the kind of the impact of people travelling less by car, which we would hope would be the way that we are going to go. Even at the moment, obviously, car usage is going up, and nobody's getting on trains because of the people's worries about the virus. So that's, you know, that's something that we need to look at, and we certainly need to look at in the regions. You know, if we're supporting local neighbourhoods to be more sustainable, then that means reallocating road space. That means doing things very differently, so that people have got room to cycle and got room to walk. And, you know, we need to make sure that bus and train timetables are connected up. There's tons of stuff, absolutely tons of stuff in there. So yeah, it's a massive opportunity to innovate at the moment, and we have to wait and see whether what the government are going to do about that. I mean, commentators on the sort of on the big speech which we're going to see this afternoon are all kind of saying, well, this looks like a rehash of some of Labour's ideas from the 2008 financial crisis, which, if that's the case, is, I think, quite disappointing, because, you know, that's not necessarily innovative enough, is it? We probably need much bigger ideas around some of the stuff that we're going to be doing. But anyway, I don't want to be. I'm certainly not, you know, criticising the government's immediate response, because obviously it's been an extremely difficult time for everybody, and I think the Chancellor has done a pretty sterling job in terms of keeping people off of the unemployment register, if nothing else. But it's, yeah, we've got a rocky road ahead, but that means we've got a huge opportunity to do things differently in the sector. Shall I stop there?
You can carry on. No, I think that's really interesting. I sort of in terms of questioning, and that I did put in the chat bar. If anyone's got any questions, put your hand up or put something in the chat bar as we go along the conversation, because I think I picked up probably 4 themes that I'd like to explore in more detail as part of the panel. Is one, the levelling up agenda, you know, sort of like, where are we with that in terms of what has happened over the last 4 months and the pandemic, where does that leave us? Because clearly government's going to have some tough choices to make, and you alluded to business cases and how it makes those trade-offs. Because some of the things that started off this debate was sort of like about how innovation funding seems to be focusing on the golden triangle around London, Oxford and Cambridge. So how do we encourage more innovation in the regions? Because when I was looking into that more further, is that in the Southeast, the West Midlands, innovation funding per person is about £33 a year, but when you get to the Northeast, the Southwest and also Scotland, that goes to £29 per person in terms of innovation funding. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that, and also bring in some of our members from the regions about how they think that you could get more innovation into the region. Should it be through more commercial contracts? Should it be more targeted public spending and things like Innovate UK, government funding, other things like that? What's the best way to approach that?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I've been doing some work for the UK 2070 Commission, which is looking at kind of, you know, social inequality and all that kind of thing, and where and if it's very interesting if you look at transport in relation to sort of inequality, which goes hand in hand with sort of the levelling up agenda. If you look at sort of economic, the indices of sort of deprivation and all that kind of thing, which is, you know, obviously where the government is kind of heading with the levelling up rhetoric. So it is interesting because if you look at local, I suppose this is an example. If you look at local authority plans to tackle regional inequality, that you never see transport in those plans, because transport isn't seen as a kind of indicator for those areas. But actually, transport connectivity is really, really important to areas that are kind of, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, peripheral, left behind, all those kind of words that we use to describe areas that are kind of not doing well economically. You know, if you're looking at ex-mining towns, or, you know, like Corby and those kind of places. It's not necessarily rural, deeply rural places, but it's places that are suffering from regional inequality. So you know, transport is a massive part of that story. And in fact, the commission, the UK 2070 Commission, are kind of lobbying quite hard to have transport, you know, put into the kind of into the mix, if you like, as the kind of as an indicator. So if you're looking at, you know, because obviously people need to be able to get to work, they need to be able to get to access education, they need to be able to access health, and if you can't access that with decent transport, then you either get in your car, or in many people's cases, if you don't have a car, then you're pretty stuffed, really. And that's where the whole notion of this kind of, where you get sort of flight out of areas, because everyone is obviously ends up moving away to try and find, you know, a closer base, if you like, for them to access all of that. So I think that's quite key to the levelling up sort of story, if you like, is how we make sure that those massive gaps in the transport network, let's face it, in a lot of those areas, can be plugged. But it's also interesting to see that over the course of this, you know, this sort of lockdown and you know, COVID period, that, you know, there's been a number of really interesting kind of transport sort of neighbourhood solutions, if you like, that have cropped up through necessity, you know, through the need for people to be, you know, accessing food in some respect, in some areas where, you know, where people aren't able to come out of their houses and that kind of thing. And actually, if you connect that back to the sort of social need of the area, then you can make a case, but you certainly can't make a case for those transport solutions if you were using the sort of traditional, you know, business case model for, you know, okay, this, you know, x plus y equals z kind of thing, that it just doesn't stack up. So again, it's that kind of, how do we how do we bring the sort of grassroots, I like the Rail Innovation Group, thinking to government to bring these other ways of thinking into the area of that the government needs to be thinking about, because we have to be able to do things differently to be able to meet that levelling up agenda.
Is your main point there that we should provide transport to all areas so that people can leave them to get access to jobs? Or, as I thought we were aiming for, is to invest in the smaller places?
Yeah, I think you need to be able to make a case for investment in those smaller places to make them more connected. But you're not necessarily in a lot of those places going to be able to make the case based on sort of passenger numbers, for example, because the passenger numbers may not be there. The need might be there, but the numbers might not be there, which is interesting because you could replicate that up to many places now, because obviously the need isn't, passenger numbers on trains have dropped by 85%. So, that's a watch this space for the rest of the country, not just the kind of left behind peripheral places.
Yeah, I guess I'm getting to the point of what is the role of the railway or the transport industry as a creator of local demand, not. So as in building a factory in a small village will create wealth in the village, rather than just building a railway for the sake of getting passengers away from the village.
Yeah, I know that's well, I think that's a question for the wider discussion here, isn't it? Because
I guess one of the things that I was thinking about in that area, not so much on terms of the localism, but I was thinking about maybe bringing Chris Jones and Milda in, and possibly Anna from Hitachi, who could maybe speak on terms of investment around the rail sector deal, and is that a way of developing more innovation and getting funding into startups in that area, looking more towards the commercial aspect of things and the supply chain and that.
I think Ray also has his hand up as well.
Oh right, okay, I can't see Ray's hand.
Right, so I can maybe kind of have a bit of an intro and tell you what we've been doing. So there have been a couple consultations that relevant to this discussion out, the Future of Transport consultation and the Decarbonizing Transport Setting the Challenge consultation released by Department for Transport that we've submitted responses. And the key thing there that we noticed is that every time there is a conversation about how to create the sort of mobility as a service and that mobility for these different regions, or decarbonize the transport, railway is left behind a bit. So railway is not considered seriously within those kind of programs. And what we're saying that, the first thing is every time you think about these things, you have to include the consideration of railway, because if you, let's just say, taking mobility as a service, if you have other mobility services feeding into railway station, that creates that sort of accessibility. You don't have to bring, or you build more urban light rail solutions in the cities that maybe don't necessarily need a high heavy rail. Same with decarbonization, investing into data and all of this. And so every time the thinking in the government currently is, every time you think about innovation and investment and spurring things on, railway is only considered as part of the big infrastructure project, even that, not even that much. So what we're saying every time is what about railway? So don't forget railway, there's stuff happening there. And I think that's where the kind of the churn is happening, the investment in the infrastructure, investment in digital assets, pushing for that open data, and we're kind of very much focused on that at the moment.
So I have a question then. Chris, you might know this, of the 5 billion that's been promised in the next 5 years for walking and cycling, how much of that is going to be spent on access to public transport?
I actually don't know, to be honest. I don't veer into this that much because my project's so commercially separate from all of this, and I only really look at rail. Sorry.
But this is the argument we're kind of making as well. It's like if you want the mobility as the sort of active travel to happen, absolutely invest into railway stations as the place-based investment. You know, make them environmentally friendly, net zero within the construction, but also within your thinking. So you can access the railway stations by walking, cycling, mobility. You know, these slow scooters thingies. And not just focus on, oh, how do we get more buses or more cars on road transport feeding into railways? Because we say if you do invest that, if you make the railway stations a place, people will walk and cycle. That will increase if you make that possible.
That's interesting because I've got two on that 5 billion investment. It's being applied for by local authorities. So it will depend on what's in local authority plans. So I guess to a certain extent it won't be that joined up because I know that Brighton has applied for funding and it's just really to put in the emergency measures to create more cycling. Although I did see on the news this morning that they are banning cars from the city centre as a temporary measure. So we'll see how that goes. But I think in terms of Milda's point, with the fact that we never consider rail because it's just thought of as a big infrastructure project, and it is nicely linked to the net zero, is rail does still only account for 7-8% of travel journeys in the UK, even before the current situation where demand has collapsed. So car was still people's primary use of travel. I mean, more people get buses. So also playing to that point about it's actually about joining up the journeys and do we need to create, and also, going back to the, having a national transport strategy and that actually transport hubs that are around stations and communities.
I've just plunked some statistics into the chat. Yeah, it just lifted from our because I was preparing the decarbonisation response from RIA, and there is the transport decarbonisation consultation is the first time it actually will look at all of the transport modes, so rail, aviation, road, buses, all of that. So that this is the first time it's sort of, I think is the closest we get to the national transport strategy.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think I'm just seeing popping up on the chat as well, a point from Peter about the 7-8% total travel, but what's that in miles per person? I don't know. I mean, I know that people travel more by rail, longer distances, because I know from previous national transport statistics, I think sort of like people use rail to travel further since they've been taking the survey. People travel more and longer than they did when they started off the survey in the 50s. I think they started the survey, so people have been taking that opportunity to do that. But I think going back to Deb's original point about the local issue, and when we were exploring about building something locally so that you create the demand locally, is that need to travel longer distances still going to be there, and we need to be focusing more on that local agenda?
Yeah.
So something I've been asked to start working on around my project and some similar projects is not just the boosting the economy in the local area, but how we can improve transport links to areas around. Because one thing the government is focused on now with this huge drive to build infrastructure is to boost economies in a network of towns. Particularly if you can link, for example, central London with areas like Hounslow that are deprived, and then on from there. So that's what they're really trying to focus on now, which is where a lot of the beaching reversal work is starting to come in.
You need a new title.
So I was chatting to Ray the other week. I don't actually know what this project's called. We just call it beaching and work, but I don't know what the public name of it is.
Does Ray know?
It's Restoring Your Railways project. But the challenge with it, I've been looking at it, and some really interesting projects have come up that members of Parliament have submitted. And one includes the Carl Shorten Beaches staircase, which clearly isn't restoring your railways. So there seems to be some misunderstanding, and I don't know how that's going to shake out, because key projects from restoring your railways are projects like, if any of you know Tor Bay, the railway line, which goes on from Paynton to Chertston Ferrers, linking Brixham. If you're in the north east, you'll know the Ashington Blythe, which I think has been funded. And then if you're in the Midlands, there's Burton-upon-Trent to Leicester. And in the northwest, there's Fleetwood in lovely Blackpool to Port and Lifflide, which are all those sort of innovation projects. But one of the points I was going to pick up on that you've mentioned was about funding. And I've been working with the local enterprise partnerships. And I don't know if you've come across local enterprise partnerships, but these are organisations which are a group of councils and authorities. So, for example, in the southeast, there's the SELEP, which is South East Local Enterprise Partnership, which includes Essex, Kent, and also East Sussex. Next to that, you've got Coastal Capital, which covers from Croydon down to Brighton. And then I think the next one along is M3 corridors. And so these boards have transport plans and local transport plans. So, for example, CELEP is very focused around the Lower Thames crossing. They're also looking at the optimisation of HS1, High Speed 1, into deprived towns on the coast, like Hastings, Bexhill, and then along to Eastbourne. But the real challenge, and I had a call this morning with the chair of, with one of the leads, and the real challenge is the money. Where does the money come from? Because the government, in fairness, have invested 600 billion in infrastructure, which is a lot of money, but the public purse has run out. So what we are hoping, and I don't know if Rishi's going to do that today, but the key way forward is how do we look at private finance modelling, PFI, what we call version 3, where the government uses the low interest rates through the Bank of England, quasi-equity, forms a national infrastructure bank that then businesses like Costain or Bechtel or Balfour Beatty, or even the train builders themselves like Hitachi potentially, would bid for projects. So there's one near Joe's part of the world, Lewis to Uckfield, for example, that's getting a lot of traction from Maria Coulfield.
That's been getting traction for years.
I know. I think,
well, that's the problem, isn't it? A lot of them have.
Yeah. So the key is about those projects that I don't think there's a business case there. I hate to say it, but what might be a business case with Lewis to Uckfield is a very sophisticated, funky busway potentially. So, you know, you've got to think about multimodal transport. So where there is a business case, such as potentially where Ashington Blythe project that Christopher's working on, which is Heathrow Southern Access and Heathrow Western, there's clearly a business case for that. That's a no-brainer. You know, whatever. So those sort of projects, we need the money for those projects. But are they PFI? A slightly different model to how we do that. And I'm a bit, because I'm not a finance person, I'm learning about this. I do really believe the Railway Industry Association's job in some of this is actually to start to, and us, and I think we should all be involved in this, is how we start to enthuse the government to look at these alternative private finance models to take this forward. Just one other thing though, I was privy to an email from Hugh Merriman through the Bexhill Battle MP, who is the lead on the House of Commons Transport Select Committee, and there is, and this is not good news and worried me when I read it, there is a view that people aren't taking the train anymore and that we shouldn't be putting trains back on the network. And that's really scary. And of course, the public, us, the people, have all been advised not to get on the damn train. So, you know, it's a really bizarre situation. And I think there's a little bit of an uphill struggle there.
Well, I think, I mean, it is interesting. I think you've raised lots of interesting points there, Ray, because I think, you know, I mean, like the first one is the public purse being bust, basically. And I think that is going to be a challenge for the railway and what that means going forward over the next few years, because they have, I mean, like the government have essentially broken their own railway, because they've taken the trust out of the system. So you've got a system that's costing £150 million a week or something now, with at best I don't know, 100. I think, did I see something like £150,000 worth of revenue or something coming in? So they've effectively destroyed their own business, their own model. So Go on,
Sorry, Jack,
Debs.
I was just going to say what's also interesting there, and I completely buy into what you're saying there, Ray. It's very interesting the kind of we have a very odd relationship with buses in this country, I think, because the solution isn't always a railway. Obviously, you know, I mean, sometimes it is, a lot of the time it is, but it isn't always. And I think that, you know, that relationship that we have with buses in this country is very closely aligned to the fact that actually, you know, if you get off of a railway station and you need to get a bus somewhere, chances are when your train gets in, you've just missed the bus. So, you know, hey, like, take a guess. That's why most people think that the buses are crap and nobody wants to use them. I mean, I'm taking London out of the equation, obviously, because the buses in London are fantastic, but everywhere else, including in Kent where I live, they don't travel at anywhere where you actually want to travel or at the times that you want to travel, and two, they're really expensive, so it's much cheaper to get in a car. So, and that's, I'm sure, the case everywhere. So there's a big thing there around, like, how do we join everything up? And obviously, you know,
I'm going to add that Brighton have fantastic buses as well.
I know it's not just. I know it's just not just London that have fantastic buses. I will give you that point, but
I can see Gilda putting her hand up as well.
It's a really interesting, you know, it is a very interesting relationship that we have on that front, and also your point, Ray, about you know, like the models of finance. I agree, but also there are other models that we could look at. I mean, I was reading the other day about a bus route in Jersey. Okay, Jersey's Jersey, you know, it's got its own sort of particular issues and what have you, but they run their bus service as a social enterprise because they have got so much, you know, they've got problems with people not being able to get to work. They've got lots of problems with young people not being in employment or education, needs, or whatever the lovely term is. So they actually decided that it would be that they would be able to, you know, they've addressed things like elderly isolation, you know, in Jersey with the bus, because the bus is being run in a completely different way. It's being run as a social enterprise. So there are other ways of doing this stuff. You know, we just need to think about things differently. And I don't think any one solution is the solution, is it? There's going to be loads of different solutions depending on where you look.
I can see that Chris wants to take my spot, so I'm getting in. Yeah, so I want to also address a couple of things that Ray said. One is the sort of don't take the train if you don't have to. This is one of our government asks right now, is like, please restore public confidence in railway. If you want to decarbonize transport, you cannot do that without railway. You can't just put, you know, electric vehicles all over the place and say, great, job done, let's go have a pint. It's like, no, you have to restore the confidence in railway. Railway is the key player in that. So this is one of our big push in that aspect. And the funding one, we're kind of like, you know, and maybe it's a different angle. What another ask we're asking is to push the investment that is planned for the next control period, the investment 5-year period that Network Rail has, or DFT has, to make that investment earlier. So start investing in the projects and the enhancements a bit earlier. So now, so we can keep continuing the work rather than let's just wait for 5 years, then here's your money. So that's another sort of thing that we're pushing.
And Chris?
So I was going to come back to what Deb was saying. The difficulty is, and I can't remember what the number is now, but it all comes down to value for money and what they deem as value. So on the BCR rules, is it 2.1? It might have changed. You can't do a project. You won't get a business case signed off that's got something, or maybe 1.2, somewhere around that. But the thing is, they don't value what some people may see as a value. So comfort for people. ease of journeys, that doesn't matter, but capital cost versus number of users actually does, which means that schemes out in Cumbria, where I used to live, they're never going to get a BCR above, well, probably positive in all honesty. So that's the difficulty we've got. So there needs to be some work, and I know there is a rewrite of the Green Book ongoing at the minute, but I don't really know what's going into that.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting thing, because for me, that's one of the biggest things that needs to be sorted out and looked at again, because there is more to building value for making good transport connectivity than just capital costs or passenger growth. You know, there has to be.
And I think in terms of playing that investment argument and going back to some of the things that Milda was bringing out, and also Ray, to do with net carbon and where you target that investment, unless you actually put the environment at the centre of future business cases, actually you're never going to get those environmental benefits. We're never going to reach our target. Because Ray mentioned with working with the LEPs, Coast Capital, which is the area I'm in, they put their transport strategy out last year, and it's a very good transport strategy, but actually probably I'd say 70% of it was focused on the road. And obviously they were looking at particularly improving road haulage. That was one of their big areas, but very little about improving rail and public transport connectivity if it didn't involve Gatwick Airport. So that is going to, given the crisis that probably airports and airlines are in at the moment, they're probably going to be seriously looking at how can we refocus our agenda on transport strategy. Have you got any thoughts on that, Ray, on whether anybody is looking at sort of like what we need to be looking at now?
So there is the National Infrastructure Commission, and I need to do some research on what they're actually doing, because they're the ones that's supposed to pull this all together into one big, as Deb kind of suggested, what is the National Transport Plan? But the aviation sector and that piece is at the moment, I'm off the radar with that.
Yeah, I think it's gone very quiet. The National Infrastructure Commission, I think, has gone ominously quiet. And I agree.
I'm just looking at the minister responsible, and he's obviously not a minister anymore, was Sajid Javid, that is. And clearly he's not responsible for it anymore. So that would be Rishi, wouldn't it? I guess, because he was the chancellor.
It would. Well, the Bays minister is Nadine Sahawi, so he's So I mean, there's a good game being talked, but I'm not convinced. There was a whole set of documents that came out very early on from the National Infrastructure Commission with all these pillars of, whatever, lovely, all that government speak that they love.
Pillars, don't they?
Yeah.
I wonder how many pillars
Let's just build the pillars, But yeah, I mean, it was encouraging, I thought, at the beginning that was all coming together, because it's a mechanism for bringing everything into one place, isn't it, really? And for that avoidance of silo working, which Johanna, you were talking about, which happens in local government really badly, where things don't get joined up. But let's face it, it happens really badly in central government as well. One department's beavering away doing something, and then another department's not actually connecting up with, which is my worry because actually the journey to net zero is probably something that should be a focus across everything, and I'm sure in theory it is, but it possibly isn't in practice just yet.
So a lot of the things that were going to be published, like the Infrastructure Finance Review, the National Infrastructure Strategy, and a number of other reports, usually, so they were up to the stage where they were going to go for right round, which for people who don't know is where Cabinet Office facilitate these papers being passed around government for all departments to comment if it would interfere with them. It didn't actually go to right round yet, but they had started to informally ask departments, and then suddenly everything went quiet, which suggests to us that somebody in one of the top departments is holding it up.
Yeah.
And this was all around the time that the Chancellor did change over. So this is just my opinion, that something is happening where they are maybe rethinking quite a lot of these documents and how they're actually going to link with each other.
Yeah. Yeah, we probably just have to wait and see what Dominic Cummings thinks about it all, let's face it.
I'm conscious that Peter and Anna have had their hands up for a while. Do you still have thoughts? Anna?
Well, it's probably been said already. So I just wanted to come in on the point of how do we restore confidence in rail passengers, and do we need to do more as a group and as stakeholders? It's been good to hear that RIA is doing their part, and then the DFT apparently are lobbying number 10. So I think that was really just the point. So I understand that maybe some of the operators are a bit relieved of the pressure because the government's stepping in, but I still think, is there more we could do? Do we need to do more lobbying in order to tell people to use trains again? Because it is safe and there are various solutions. We have the SIPBART solution. There's so many solutions to make it safe.
Well, I think the first thing that needs to happen is that they need to stop telling people to avoid public transport.
Exactly.
I'm just wondering, before we bring Peter in, can we do a hands up of who has taken a train or a bus in the last month? Okay. So I think, notwithstanding sort of like need, and the fact that we maybe haven't had the need to go anywhere, but I think maybe some of it starts with some of us who work in the industry to to start leading, rather than just being.
Well, I mean, I take the train all the time, and I have a lovely time on the train because they're empty. But because
there is that, it is the best time.
Well, it's
interesting. Don't use it. I don't tweet that I'm on the train because I don't want people telling me I shouldn't be using it.
Yeah. It's interesting. Obviously, as you know, do a lot of work for the High Speed Rail Group, and we've been talking to the Rail Delivery Group about putting something out which talks about how the resilience of the railway, the fact that actually it's a very safe mode of travel, etc. But there's a real nervousness about how that lines up with what government are saying, because obviously nobody wants to start countering what the government message is. So as Milda was saying, I mean, it's a really tricky one, because I know you can see that the government are in a difficult position, because there is I don't want to say it's a strong possibility, there is some possibility that there will be more local lockdowns happening towards the end of the summer. So that's a tricky thing to navigate for the government, because what they don't want to do is, we were due to be easing into the reassurance mode, from government is my understanding, where the government start to say, actually, please be reassured that train travel is very safe. But that seems to be, they're hanging back on that, and you can sort of see why, because it's complicated. There's more people don't want to be travelling. In one sense, you could say that it will be great if nobody ever again had to travel on a really, really crowded train, because nobody wants to travel on a crowded train anyway, let alone in the middle of a global pandemic. So that's but that then opens up so many other questions about people's work patterns, about ticketing, pricing, all those things. That all comes into the mix. That's another huge kind of, not a can of worms exactly, but it's complicated, isn't it?
It's complicated.
A whole new discussion.
If you want tax income very quickly, you need to get people back to city centre working.
You do.
So can we just bring Peter in, as he had his hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say two things. Sort of the secondary point is, even me working within the rail industry, I didn't realise we were able to take rail services for non-essential journeys now. The advice have seemed to change overnight from essential journeys only to, well, only if you don't have another option, which was impossibly subtle. And when I found this out last Thursday, I'm like, well, great, okay, I'll need to go to Acton to see some friends at a 2 metre distance. I could take the train rather than cycling there and back. And indeed, this evening I'm off to Northampton to meet up with another friend who I've not seen for ages. So that the government's messaging is very wishy-washy, and so not, right, okay, here's what you can do and can't do.
Yeah.
But I think Ray mentioned the point about, and I think Debbie mentioned it as well, about bus and rail integration. one of the problems I've had when travelling on non-trunk routes is is the inability to find out where there are bus connections from and to, how often they are, and whether it actually ties in with train times.
Yeah.
As an example, a couple of years ago, I went up to where was it? It was Spalding in Lincolnshire for a friend's wedding, and the wedding was actually in another town that wasn't rail served, and I had to get a bus there and a bus back, and I had absolutely no idea whether there was a bus service from near where I was staying in Spalding to the other place and back, and at what time. And it seems like what we're missing is data on multimodal public transport. We're very good at buy your rail tickets from this site or that site, or to go to a bus operator's website to look for their services. But apart from, I think there's a website, bustimes.org.uk, which is sort of an open train times for buses. There's no real multimodal journey planner out there. So I can't type in from Euston to, say, Buckingham, show me my options. I'd have to go, right, well, Buckingham's near Milton Keynes, so maybe there's a bus from Milton Keynes. Who is it operated by? How do I get over there? What times does it run? If everything were more integrated, I think people would travel more by train, because you could do that last mile journey without a lot of hassle trying to find out whether you can make that last mile journey.
That solution is there. It's on Google Maps. Google Maps has all the bus times in the country on them. So you can just plan your journeys.
And Mild has just posted something on the chat as well to say that there's a bus open data service.
There is the bus open data service, but I will say that it requires bus companies to put the correct data in. So I would say that is not foolproof.
That sounds like a business opportunity there to build something. Although, of course, it comes back to the funding, doesn't it?
You have actually sort of guessed what my next point was. In fact, I have the webpage for the bus open data site open at the moment on one of my screens. Last time I looked, there was only one operator having put their data in there. For investment, what we might need is not the investment in regional companies working within rail and the transport sector, but the people actually operating these services to help them get the money to pay us to get better data about their services out there, because unless you're a company like Stagecoach or another bus company, I'm not really up on buses, you're probably like, well, I'm mandated to provide this timetable data, but there's no urge to go further and have, say, real-time bus data, or your next bus will be in 5 minutes, unless you're in a major city. So maybe those companies should have funding available to them to spend on improving their passenger information.
I don't know how Brighton buses do it, but they do it really, really well, updating you on information. They've got a really good app, which I think is done by a German company, I think. You can click on any bus stop and it gives you update, and you can see when it is, and it pushes notifications too, so it's quite good. Now, I notice people are starting to run because it's coming to the end, so and we have a minute left. So Liam, would you like to sum up?
Yes, here's all the things I want to discuss. No one we discussed, so that'll be the next one. Transport investment. Next time we're going to talk about supply chains.
Good.
Thanks for everyone for joining us. Does anyone have any last questions or anything?
No.
Right. Well, everyone can go look at now what the Chancellor announces.
Yes.
What time's he debating? Because I haven't even
1 o'clock.
1 o'clock. Oh,
yeah. Now.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you for joining us. I hope
everyone.
Bye-bye.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.